the Apache widow who saved the wounded cowboy, but never imagined what he did next. In the middle of this rugged landscape, Ayanna, a widowed Apache woman, moved quietly around her small homestead. Her life had changed drastically after the death of her husband, leaving her alone to manage the land, the small herd of goats, and the few crops she could coax from the dry soil. She had learned to be self-reliant, to trust her instincts, and to survive in a world that often seemed indifferent to her struggles. Yet, despite her solitude, Ayanna carried herself with quiet strength. There was a resilience in her eyes, a calm determination in her movements, and an unspoken understanding of the rhythms of the land she called home. That evening, as Ayanna checked on her goats, she noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure was staggering along the trail near the edge of the canyon. At first, she thought it might be a lost traveler, or perhaps one of the wandering cowboys who occasionally passed near her land. But as she squinted against the setting sun, she saw the figure falter and collapse onto the sand. Something in that sudden motion sent a sharp pang of concern through her. Without hesitation, she left the goats behind and moved toward the man, her steps silent but swift over the uneven ground. When she reached him, the sight that met her eyes made her heart race with a mix of fear and compassion. He was a young cowboy, his clothes torn and stained with blood, and a deep wound on his side was soaked through. His face was pale, and he groaned weakly with each shallow breath. The world around them was silent except for the whisper of the wind, yet the gravity of the moment pressed down on Ayanna as she crouched beside him. She had to act quickly if he was to survive. Ayanna examined the wound carefully. The bullet had grazed his side, and the blood had begun to congeal, dark and threatening. She knew she didn't have modern tools or medicine, but she had learned the ways of her ancestors. She gently tore a strip from a clean piece of cloth she kept for emergencies and began to clean the wound with water drawn from her small cistern. Every movement was careful, deliberate. She whispered softly to him, though she did not know if he could hear or understand. Words had power, she believed, even in moments of pain. "Hold on," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "You will live." As she worked, the cowboy opened his eyes slightly. They were clouded with pain and confusion. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped him. Ayanna couldn't understand his words at first, but the urgency in his voice was clear. She pressed her hand gently over his arm to steady him. He flinched, a mixture of pain and fear evident in his eyes, yet he did not resist her touch. Ayanna realized that helping him would not be simple. He was far from the nearest town, and she had no means of calling for help. Her home was a small adobe structure, simple but sturdy, surrounded by dry desert plants and a few cultivated plots of corn and beans. She carefully lifted him, supporting his weight as best she could. The journey to her home was slow and difficult. Every step was a battle against his groans of pain, the uneven ground, and the constant fear that someone might appear from the canyon or the hills, drawn by the signs of distress. Yet Ayanna's resolve did not falter. She moved steadily, her strength and endurance evident with each step. When they finally reached the homestead, she laid him down on a simple cot in the main room. She tended to his wound again, cleaning it carefully and wrapping it tightly with fresh cloth. She brewed a warm herbal tea from plants she grew for healing, hoping it would soothe his pain and prevent infection. The cowboy drifted in and out of consciousness, his breaths uneven but slowly growing steadier. Ayanna watched over him, never leaving his side, checking the wound frequently and speaking softly, her words a constant reassurance. Hours passed, and the desert night settled around them. The stars twinkled brightly, and the cool night air drifted through the open windows. Ayanna worked in silence, her movements efficient and calm. She thought about her own life, about the loss she had endured, and about the hardships of surviving alone in such a harsh land. Yet in helping this wounded stranger, she felt a sense of purpose, a reminder that compassion and courage could exist even in the most isolated corners of the world. By morning, the cowboy's condition had improved slightly. He was still weak, but he was alive. He opened his eyes fully this time, taking in his surroundings. Ayanna was near him, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and fresh water. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down. Ayanna placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him gently. "Don't rush," she said. "You need to regain your strength." The cowboy's eyes met hers, a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and something else, something unspoken that neither of them could name. Ayanna did not ask him questions about where he came from or why he was in the desert. She only focused on his recovery, giving him what he needed to survive. And yet she could not help but feel curious. His life was a mystery, and somehow, by helping him, she had become a part of it. As the days passed, Ayanna continued to care for him. She cleaned his wounds, tended to his pain, and ensured he ate enough to regain his strength. The cowboy began to talk more, slowly at first, then with more energy as his body healed. He shared fragments of his life, the cattle drives, the dangers he had faced, and the solitude of traveling across vast lands. Ayanna listened, not judging, only observing and understanding the hardships that had led him to her doorstep. She too began to share pieces of her own life, her losses, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned from living alone in the desert. In this exchange, an unexpected bond began to form. They were two strangers from different worlds, yet they found a connection in shared vulnerability and the quiet strength of survival. Ayanna realized that her act of helping this man was not only changing his life, but also affecting her own, bringing a sense of purpose and companionship she had not felt since her husband had passed. Despite the growing trust, Ayanna remained cautious. The world was harsh, and strangers could bring danger as easily as they could bring gratitude. She kept her eyes open, always alert to the sounds of the desert, the movement of animals, and the possibility of unwelcome visitors. But even with this caution, her heart had softened. The cowboy, though injured and weary, had a kindness and resilience that mirrored her own. And for the first time in years, she felt that helping someone else could also help her heal. By the end of the first week, the cowboy could move around with less assistance. He was still weak, but the fire in his eyes had returned. Ayanna watched him as he carefully tended to small chores, trying to contribute despite his injuries. She saw determination, courage, and a hint of humility. A man who had faced death and survived not through luck alone, but through the care of another. And in that moment, Ayanna understood the true power of compassion. A single act of kindness could save a life, change a path, and forge a bond that neither distance nor danger could easily break. The sun rose each morning, bathing the desert in golden light, and the days passed with quiet routine. Ayanna and the cowboy, though still cautious of each other, began to move in unspoken harmony. Their lives, once separate and solitary, had intersected in a way that neither had expected. And as the cowboy regained strength, a silent understanding grew between them. The desert was harsh, the world was uncertain, but together, even for a short time, they could face it. Ayanna had acted without hesitation, driven by instinct and compassion. She had saved a man she barely knew, and in doing so, she had begun a journey that would test both of their characters, challenge their fears, and reveal truths about courage, trust, and the quiet power of human kindness. And though she could not yet imagine the events that would follow, she felt a spark of hope, a reminder that even in a life marked by loss, there could still be unexpected moments of connection, bravery, and change. The days passed slowly, yet steadily, in the quiet desert. Homestead. Ethan, the cowboy, was beginning to regain his strength under Ayanna's watchful care. His body, once weak and trembling, now had more stability, though each movement was still cautious. He had scars from past travels, the result of hard work, fights, and narrow escapes, and Ayana noticed them with a mixture of curiosity and quiet understanding. He tried not to speak much at first, conserving his energy, but the gentle atmosphere of the homestead made him gradually more comfortable. He had learned that Ayana was a woman who valued action over words, yet she listened when he spoke. Her silence, he realized, was not coldness. It was attentiveness, respect, and patience. Ayana's daily routine continued, but now it included Ethan in small ways. She had him fetch water from the nearby stream, tending to the animals and even helping with small chores around the homestead. His movements were slow, but she did not rush him. Instead, she guided him patiently, showing him how to balance strength with caution. During these tasks, she would share small lessons about the desert, the way the wind shifted, how to find edible plants, and the subtle signs of approaching animals. Ethan absorbed her words with humility, realizing that survival in this land required wisdom and respect, not just physical strength. As Ethan regained energy, he began to open up. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken fence, he spoke quietly about his life. He told Ayana about the cattle drives he had joined, the endless days under the scorching sun, and the nights sleeping under stars that were both beautiful and lonely. He spoke of the dangers he had faced, bandits, harsh weather, and injuries he barely survived. Ayana listened without interruption, feeling the weight of his stories, but she did not judge him. She had experienced loss and hardship herself, and she understood that life often demanded endurance and courage beyond ordinary measures. Ethan, noticing her attentiveness, asked her about her life. She hesitated at first, unused to sharing her personal story with anyone, but something about him, a quiet honesty, a genuine gratitude, made her willing to speak. She told him about her husband, how he had been a kind and brave man who had taught her about the land and the people. She spoke of the loss she felt when he passed, the loneliness that followed, and how she had learned to survive on her own. Her voice carried the strength of someone who had endured pain but refused to let it break her spirit. Ethan listened in silence, touched by the depth of her resilience. The bond between them grew naturally. They shared meals together, simple foods prepared from what the desert provided: corn, beans, dried herbs, and the occasional meat from a hunting trip. Ayana taught him how to prepare some of the traditional dishes she remembered from her family, and Ethan, in turn, helped where he could, chopping firewood or mending tools. Their conversations became longer, more comfortable, and filled with quiet laughter. Yet underlying it all, Ayana remained cautious. She could not ignore the fact that he was a stranger and that the world beyond her homestead was full of unpredictable dangers. One morning, while fetching water, Ethan noticed a trail of footprints near the edge of her land. He pointed them out to Ayana, concern flashing in his eyes. She examined the ground carefully and realized that someone, or perhaps more than one person, had been following the trail he had left when he collapsed. Her heart quickened, but her face remained calm. She had learned long ago that fear must be measured and actions deliberate. She told Ethan to stay close to the house while she investigated further. Moving quietly, she followed the tracks to the outskirts of her property, noting signs of disturbance and broken branches. Whoever had passed by was cautious but determined. Returning to Ethan, she explained the situation in a composed voice. "We must be careful," she said. "Strangers can mean danger. We must protect ourselves and our home." Ethan nodded, realizing that her caution was not mistrust, it was experience. Together, they reinforced the doors, checked the livestock, and made sure the small homestead was as secure as possible. In doing so, a new layer of trust developed between them. He relied on her guidance and instincts, and she relied on his willingness to help and learn. The following days were a mixture of recovery and vigilance. Ethan's health improved steadily, his strength returning faster than expected. He practiced walking longer distances, sometimes venturing to the edge of the property while Ayanna watched closely. Their conversations became more personal, touching on hopes, dreams, and the small joys that often go unnoticed. Ethan shared stories of his childhood in a small town far away, the laughter of siblings, the lessons learned from his father, and the occasional mischief that had once defined his youth. Ayanna, in return, spoke of her own family, the traditions she had grown up with, and the sense of responsibility that came with living alone in the desert. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan attempted to sit by the fire without assistance. Ayanna handed him a cup of warm tea, and they sat together in a comfortable silence. The desert was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, yet within the homestead there was a sense of peace. They both knew that life outside could be harsh, but in this small sanctuary there was understanding, mutual respect, and the quiet beginnings of friendship. Ethan began to help more actively around the homestead. He learned to tend the small garden, repair fences, and even care for the goats with gentle hands. Ayanna watched him carefully, impressed by his willingness to learn and his humility. He did not attempt to take control or assert authority. Instead, he followed her guidance and contributed where he could. Through these actions, he demonstrated gratitude and integrity, qualities Ayanna had not expected in a stranger, and qualities that began to shift her perception of him from a mere survivor to a man of character. One morning, a sudden sandstorm swept across the desert. The wind roared, and sand filled every corner of the homestead. Ayanna and Ethan worked together, securing the roof, tying down loose equipment, and protecting the animals. The storm tested their patience, endurance, and ability to act under pressure. It also revealed the depth of their reliance on one another. When the storm finally passed, they emerged exhausted but relieved. The shared experience strengthened their bond further, illustrating that survival often depended not just on skill or strength, but on trust, cooperation, and courage. In quiet moments, Ethan began to show subtle gestures of gratitude. He repaired a broken tool without being asked, brought fresh water from the stream, and even left small offerings of edible plants he had found. Ayanna noticed these acts, understanding that he was not simply recovering for himself, but was contributing to the life they were creating together. These gestures, though small, spoke volumes about his character and the sincerity of his intentions. By the end of the second week, Ethan was moving freely around the property. He could perform most daily chores without assistance, though Ayanna remained nearby, watching and guiding when needed. They had developed a rhythm, an unspoken understanding of each other's strengths and limitations. In this rhythm, Ayanna saw the possibility of companionship that was not romantic, but built on respect, trust, and shared experience. She felt a quiet pride in his progress, recognizing that her decision to help him had made a profound difference in his life. One evening, as they sat outside under the vast, star-filled sky, Ethan spoke with a hint of vulnerability. He admitted that he had not expected anyone to help him, that he had thought his fate was sealed in the desert. Ayanna listened, her expression calm but attentive. She did not offer empty reassurance. Instead, she acknowledged his fears and validated his feelings. "You survived," she said gently. "You are still here. That means something. You are stronger than you realize." Her words resonated with him. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth and experience. He realized that his survival was not just a matter of luck, but the result of someone's compassion, courage, and wisdom. He began to understand the value of trust and the impact of kindness, lessons that would stay with him long after he regained full strength. Through these weeks, the bond between Ayanna and Ethan deepened. They shared not only physical space and survival tasks, but also emotional understanding. Each day brought small victories, moments of laughter, and the satisfaction of achieving tasks together. They had formed a connection that neither had anticipated, a connection born from necessity but strengthened by mutual respect, trust, and the quiet power of human kindness. By the end of part 2, Ethan was no longer the helpless cowboy who had collapsed in the desert. He was recovering, learning, and beginning to contribute meaningfully to the life around him. Ayana, in turn, felt a renewed sense of purpose and connection, realizing that helping him had not only saved a life, but it also reminded her of the strength and resilience within herself. Their shared journey was only beginning, but the foundation of trust, compassion, and understanding had been firmly laid. The desert was quiet that morning, but Ayana sensed a change in the air. The wind carried a subtle warning, a shift she had learned to recognize after years of living alone in the harsh land. Her instincts told her that trouble could be near, though nothing appeared obvious at first. Ethan, now stronger and moving with more confidence, was helping her tend to the goats. He carried the water bucket steadily and adjusted the fence posts with care. He had regained much of his strength, and Ayana felt proud of his progress. Yet her mind remained alert, aware that the outside world could bring danger at any time. It wasn't long before her caution was proven wise. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving quickly across the desert. Ayana narrowed her eyes, noticing the worn hat and familiar silhouette of a man on horseback, someone from the town nearby, perhaps, but not a friendly visitor. She quickly realized it could be a bounty hunter or a person seeking Ethan for reasons unknown to her. She called Ethan over, her voice calm but urgent. "We have company," she said. "We need to be careful." Ethan looked toward the approaching figure, the reality of his past catching up with him. He had known that once he recovered, his presence in the desert would not remain unnoticed. The man on horseback was moving with purpose, and it was clear he was seeking someone. Ayana's instincts kicked in. She instructed Ethan to stay close to the house, out of sight, while she prepared to confront the situation. Despite her fear for their safety, she remained composed. Years of surviving in the desert had taught her that panic was a dangerous companion. As the rider drew closer, Ayana could see him more clearly. His eyes were sharp, his movements deliberate. It was evident he was skilled and determined. Ayana moved slowly, ensuring she remained hidden behind the adobe walls of her home. She had to think quickly. The desert offered little cover, and confrontation could be risky. She considered her options, realizing that her first priority was to protect Ethan, whose wounds had only recently healed. She also knew that any aggressive action could provoke a violent response, which she wanted to avoid. The rider stopped briefly, scanning the area with suspicion. Ayana could see the tension in his posture, the way his hand hovered near the gun at his side. He was looking for someone, and it was clear that whoever he sought had been here recently. Ayana remained still, her mind calculating the safest course of action. She decided to remain hidden, hoping that the rider would move on. But her hope was cautious. She knew the desert held few guarantees, and this stranger seemed persistent. Back inside, Ethan noticed her unease and asked quietly, "Who is that?" Ayana shook her head slightly. "Someone from the town." "He is looking for you." Ethan's expression changed, a mix of concern and realization crossing his face. He had known that his past could catch up with him at any moment, and now it had. Ayana saw a flicker of guilt and worry in his eyes, but she said nothing. Instead, she focused on preparing for whatever might come, ensuring that both of them were ready to respond calmly and wisely. The rider did not approach the homestead directly. Instead, he circled cautiously, as if trying to locate signs of recent activity. Ayana observed every movement, every shadow, and every detail of the ground. Her mind worked like a map, plotting the rider's potential path and predicting his next move. She whispered to Ethan, advising him to stay low and keep quiet. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They were in a delicate position. One wrong move could lead to violence, and they had to avoid it if possible. Hours passed with tension hanging in the air. The rider moved deliberately, checking the surrounding desert and nearby trails. Ayanna and Ethan remained hidden, conserving their energy and watching silently. The desert's harsh sun beat down on them, but they focused on patience, knowing that rushing or panicking could be fatal. During these hours, Ethan began to understand the depth of Ayanna's skill and experience. She did not act recklessly. Every decision was measured, based on knowledge and instinct. He realized that her caution was not fear, it was wisdom, honed over years of surviving alone in a dangerous world. Finally, the rider moved on, leaving the immediate area, though Ayanna knew this encounter was only the beginning. She turned to Ethan, her expression calm but serious. "You cannot stay here forever," she said. "The world outside will always find you if you remain in one place for too long. You must be ready to face it when the time comes." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. He had been focused on recovery, but now he realized that his journey was far from over. Ayanna's guidance had kept him safe so far, but he would need courage and wisdom to continue beyond her homestead. Over the next few days, they prepared for the possibility of further visitors. Ayanna taught Ethan more about the desert, about reading tracks, noticing subtle changes in the wind, and understanding the signs of approaching strangers. She explained the importance of listening carefully, watching closely, and thinking several steps ahead. Ethan absorbed these lessons with seriousness, realizing that survival required more than physical strength. It required awareness, strategy, and the ability to act decisively. During this time, their bond continued to grow. Ethan shared more of his past, telling Ayanna about conflicts he had been involved in, the mistakes he had made, and the moments when luck or skill had kept him alive. He did not try to impress her or boast. Instead, he spoke honestly, acknowledging both his strengths and his weaknesses. Ayanna listened patiently, her respect for him deepening. She could see that he was not a reckless man but someone who had learned from experience and was willing to continue learning. One afternoon, as they worked together to reinforce the homestead's walls, Ethan paused and looked at Ayanna. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. "You don't know me, and yet you risked so much for a stranger." Ayanna looked at him calmly, choosing her words with care. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said. "Because every life has value. Because we are all connected, whether we realize it or not." Ethan nodded, taking in her words. He realized that her courage was not only about protecting herself, but also about acting with integrity, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Their days were filled with preparation, conversation, and quiet moments of reflection. They reinforced fences, repaired tools, and ensured that the goats and crops were secure. Each task brought them closer together, not in romance, but in respect and shared purpose. Ethan's recovery was nearly complete, and Ayanna knew that soon he would have to leave, or at least face the world beyond her land. The thought was bittersweet. She had grown accustomed to his presence and the bond they had formed, yet she understood that his life was his own, and he could not remain hidden indefinitely. One evening, as the desert sky turned shades of purple and gold, Ethan and Ayanna sat outside, listening to the distant calls of coyotes and the whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. Ethan reflected on the lessons he had learned: patience, observation, and the quiet power of trust. He realized that Ayanna had not only saved his life physically, but had also taught him the importance of thoughtfulness, compassion, and preparation. He felt a deep gratitude for her, recognizing that without her guidance, he might not have survived the desert or the dangers that lurked beyond. Ayanna, too, reflected on the recent events. She realized that helping Ethan had challenged her in unexpected ways. She had faced fear, risk, and uncertainty, yet she had acted with courage and wisdom. She saw in him not only a man recovering from injury, but also someone capable of growth, learning, and understanding. The encounter with the rider had reinforced the reality that the world outside was unpredictable, yet it had also strengthened her confidence in their ability to face challenges together. In the following days, Ethan began to practice moving quietly through the desert, learning to navigate the terrain without drawing attention. Anna guided him, teaching him how to move silently, observe the land, and anticipate potential threats. She emphasized the importance of self-reliance, courage, and awareness. These lessons were not just about survival. They were about becoming a person capable of facing the world with skill, confidence, and integrity. Ethan absorbed these teachings with gratitude, realizing that Anna's guidance was shaping him in ways he had never imagined. As Part 3 comes to a close, the stage is set for a turning point. Ethan is nearly recovered, stronger and wiser than before, but the desert and the outside world remains full of uncertainty. Anna has prepared him as best she can, teaching him not only physical survival but also the deeper lessons of trust, courage, and moral integrity. Together they have faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and their bond has grown stronger as a result. The challenges ahead will test them further, but they now have the skills, knowledge, and understanding to face what comes next. The desert, vast and unforgiving, stretches endlessly around them. The sun rises and sets, the winds blow, and the land remains unchanged in its harsh beauty. Yet within this unchanging world, Anna and Ethan have found connection, trust, and strength. Their journey is far from over, but the foundation of resilience, wisdom, and mutual respect has been firmly laid. And as they prepare for the trials that await, they know that their bond, born from compassion, courage, and shared experience, will guide them through whatever challenges come next. The desert was quieter than usual that morning, the sun climbing slowly over the rocky hills and casting long shadows across the sandy landscape. Anna moved through her homestead with her usual calm efficiency, checking the animals, inspecting the small garden, and ensuring that the adobe walls of her home were secure. Yet even as she went about her work, she felt a subtle tension in the air, a sense that change was coming. She had taught Ethan well, and he had learned much about survival, observation, and the ways of the desert, but she knew that the world beyond her land was unpredictable. Ethan had grown stronger with each passing day. His movements were confident and deliberate, his injuries fully healed, and his spirit renewed. He worked alongside Anna, reinforcing fences, repairing tools, and tending to the goats. He had learned to move quietly, observe the smallest details in the desert, and anticipate potential threats. Yet, he remained humble, never overstepping or attempting to take control. His presence had become a comforting rhythm in the daily life of the homestead, a testament to both his resilience and Anna's guidance. One afternoon, as they worked on the outer fence line, Ethan paused and looked toward the distant hills. He had noticed signs of recent activity, footprints in the sand, disturbed brush, and broken twigs that suggested someone had passed through the area. He shared his observations with Anna, who nodded thoughtfully. "You are learning well," she said quietly. "These signs can tell us much if we pay attention, but remember, caution is always necessary. Not everyone in the world respects life or kindness." Her words reminded Ethan of the fragility of safety in the desert. He had grown stronger, but he had also come to understand that strength alone was not enough. Survival required awareness, foresight, and the willingness to act wisely in the face of danger. He began to see that Anna's lessons were not only about physical skills, but also about character, integrity, and moral courage. She had shown him that protecting others and acting with compassion were as important as defending oneself. Days passed, and life in the homestead continued with careful routine. Anna and Ethan shared quiet moments in the evenings, sitting outside as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and pink. They spoke of simple things, the patterns of the desert, the habits of animals, and memories of distant places. These conversations created a bond that went beyond mere survival. There was trust, mutual respect, and a sense of shared purpose that had grown organically over the weeks. Ethan had begun to rely on Ayana's wisdom, while she had come to appreciate his patience, humility, and willingness to learn. One evening, a distant dust cloud appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward the homestead. Ayana's eyes narrowed as she observed it. She recognized the signs immediately. Riders were approaching, and they were not casual travelers. Her heart remained steady, but her mind raced with possibilities. She knew that this could be dangerous, yet she also understood that hiding or running was not always the solution. Sometimes, the most effective protection was preparation, strategy, and foresight. Ayana instructed Ethan to stay close to the house and out of sight. She moved to the outer perimeter, quietly observing the riders as they approached. There were 3 of them, their faces partially obscured by hats and scarves, their movements purposeful and deliberate. Ayana realized they were looking for someone, and it was clear that person was Ethan. She felt a surge of concern for him, knowing that he could be in danger if they discovered him unprepared. Yet, as she watched, she noticed something unexpected. The riders were cautious, checking the terrain and adjusting their pace. They were skilled but not reckless. Ayana took a deep breath, recalling all she had taught Ethan about awareness, observation, and patience. She knew that this moment would test not only their physical skills, but also their judgment and composure. She called Ethan quietly, explaining the situation and emphasizing the importance of remaining calm and silent. He nodded, understanding that this was more than a test of survival, it was a test of character. The riders passed near the homestead, their eyes scanning for signs of activity. Ayana had taken care to obscure footprints and disturbed areas, and the riders' attention was diverted. Yet she knew that the encounter could have gone differently if they had been less careful. The tension in the air was palpable, but neither she nor Ethan reacted with panic. They waited patiently, allowing the danger to move past them. When the dust cloud finally disappeared into the distance, they exhaled together, relief mixing with the adrenaline of the moment. In the days that followed, Ethan reflected on the experience. He realized that Ayana's teachings had prepared him well, not only for survival but also for dealing with unpredictable challenges. He had learned to think ahead, to remain calm under pressure, and to act with intelligence and patience. He recognized that strength alone would not have kept him safe. Only the combination of knowledge, observation, and moral courage could do that. He felt gratitude toward Ayana, understanding that her guidance had shaped him in ways he had never anticipated. Ayana, too, considered the events carefully. She had risked much in sheltering Ethan, yet she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her actions had made a difference. She had tested her own courage, relied on her instincts, and acted decisively to protect both herself and Ethan. The encounter with the riders reinforced her belief in the importance of wisdom, preparation, and moral integrity. She knew that the world beyond her homestead was full of uncertainty, but she also recognized that courage and compassion could guide people safely through even the most dangerous situations. A week later, Ethan approached Ayana with a thoughtful expression. "I want to do something for you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done, protecting me, teaching me, keeping me safe." Ayana raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "You have already done much by surviving and learning," she said, "but what is it you wish to do?" Ethan hesitated, then explained that he had been thinking about ways to help her in return. He had noticed small repairs that were needed around the homestead, the limitations of certain tools, and ways to make life easier for her. Over the next few days, he worked quietly and diligently, repairing broken fences, reinforcing doors and crafting simple but useful tools. Each action was done without fanfare, without expectation of reward, yet it carried a deep meaning. Ayana observed his efforts, impressed not only by his skill but also by his thoughtfulness and sincerity. The gesture surprised her. She had expected gratitude in words perhaps, but not in the form of tangible help and preparation for the future. Ethan's actions demonstrated that he valued her guidance, respected her independence, and understood the importance of contributing rather than merely receiving. Ayana felt a sense of warmth and appreciation that she had not expected. It was a reminder that kindness and courage could inspire others to act in ways that were meaningful and lasting. As the days went by, the desert seemed to take on a new quality. The hardships they faced were still present: the harsh sun, the occasional sandstorm, and the ever-present risk of outsiders. But there was also a sense of balance. Ayana and Ethan had developed a partnership, rooted in trust, respect, and shared experience. They worked together, learned from each other, and faced challenges side by side. The homestead, once a solitary refuge, had become a place of connection, growth, and mutual support. One morning, Ethan gathered a small collection of herbs, dried foods, and tools, presenting them to Ayana. "These are for you," he said simply. "To make your life easier, to help protect this place, and to show my gratitude." Ayana accepted them with a mixture of surprise and humility. She understood that his actions were not simply about material aid. They were a reflection of his respect, trust, and understanding of her life. The gesture strengthened the bond between them, reinforcing the idea that true connection is built not only on words, but also on meaningful actions. In the evenings, as they sat together watching the sunset, Ayana reflected on the journey they had shared so far. She had taken a risk by helping a stranger, and that risk had been met with courage, integrity, and unexpected generosity. Ethan had not only recovered from his injuries, but had also demonstrated growth, wisdom, and a willingness to contribute meaningfully to the life around him. Their bond was no longer defined solely by survival. It had become a partnership of respect, trust, and shared purpose. Ethan, too, reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that Ayana had not only saved his life, but had also taught him the value of patience, observation, and moral courage. Her guidance had shown him that true strength is not measured only by physical ability, but also by character, wisdom, and the willingness to act with integrity. He felt gratitude not only for her care, but for the example she had set, a model of resilience, thoughtfulness, and compassion that would stay with him long after he left the desert. As Part 4 drew to a close, both Ayana and Ethan understood that their journey together had changed them in profound ways. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and challenges, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. The unexpected gestures, the acts of courage, and the lessons learned had created a bond that could not easily be broken. And as the desert stretched endlessly around them, they knew that their shared experience had prepared them for whatever trials might come next, whether together or apart. The desert had settled into its usual rhythm, with the wind whispering over the sand and the sun painting the hills in golden light. Ayana moved through her homestead, her movements calm and confident. Months had passed since she first found Ethan wounded and struggling, and much had changed since then. Her daily life continued with the routines she had mastered over the years, yet there was now a quiet sense of fulfillment that hadn't been there before. She had nurtured life, saved a man from death, and found a bond of trust and understanding she hadn't imagined possible in her solitary existence. Ethan, now fully recovered, was stronger, more self-assured, and more mindful than he had ever been. He had learned the lessons of the desert, the wisdom of patience, and the importance of observing before acting. He had grown in ways that went beyond physical healing. He had gained insight, humility, and a deep respect for Ayana, the woman who had saved him and guided him through the perils of the harsh landscape. Each day he contributed to the homestead, reinforcing fences, tending animals, and helping with small tasks. His presence was no longer that of a helpless guest, but that of a trusted companion. Despite his recovery, both of them knew that the desert could not remain a permanent refuge. Danger still lingered in the form of travelers, bandits, and other unexpected threats. Ayana had taught Ethan how to protect himself, how to read the signs of danger, and how to move with caution. He had learned not only to survive, but also to thrive in a challenging environment. Still, he could not remain indefinitely on her land. The outside world called to him, with responsibilities, debts, and unfinished journeys waiting. Ayana understood this and felt a mix of pride and melancholy as she considered the day he might leave. One crisp morning, Ethan approached Ayana with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "I need to continue my journey," he said softly. "But before I go, I want to leave something with you, something to show my gratitude and to help you in ways words cannot." Ayana studied him carefully, sensing the sincerity behind his words. She nodded, quietly acknowledging the decision he had made. She had expected this moment, and yet it carried a bittersweet weight. The time they had shared had been transformative, and now it was coming to a close. Ethan set to work with determination. He repaired the remaining weak sections of the fences, strengthened the adobe walls, and improved the water storage system. He collected herbs, dried foods, and small tools, organizing them neatly for Ayana's use. Every action was deliberate and thoughtful, a reflection of the care and respect he felt toward her. He wanted her life to be easier, safer, and more secure long after he had left. Ayana watched silently, moved by the depth of his consideration and the quiet generosity of his gestures. When the preparations were complete, Ethan presented the items to Ayana. "These are for you," he said simply, his voice steady. "To help protect your home and make your days a little easier. They are small, but they come from my respect and gratitude." Ayana accepted them with a soft smile. She understood the significance of his actions, not just the practical help, but the thoughtfulness and acknowledgement of everything she had done for him. She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a quiet joy that came from witnessing genuine kindness. In the following days, they spent their time together preparing for his departure. They repaired any final weak spots in the homestead, organized the food supplies, and ensured that everything was in order for her continued life alone. The work was quiet but purposeful, each action a reflection of the bond they had formed. There were moments of laughter as they shared stories, and moments of silence as they reflected on all that had transpired. The connection between them had grown strong, rooted in trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. As the day of departure approached, a sense of anticipation and solemnity settled over them. Ethan packed his belongings carefully, checking each item and making sure he had what he needed for the journey ahead. He looked around the homestead, taking in the familiar sights, the adobe walls, the small garden, the goats grazing peacefully, and the open expanse of desert stretching toward the horizon. Each detail reminded him of the lessons he had learned, the dangers he had faced, and the guidance that had kept him alive. Before leaving, Ethan turned to Ayana, his expression serious but gentle. "I will never forget what you have done for me," he said. "You saved my life, taught me to survive, and showed me the value of trust and compassion. I will carry that with me always." Ayana met his gaze, seeing the honesty and depth of his gratitude. "And I will never forget you," she replied softly. "You have shown courage, humility, and a willingness to grow. You have made a difference in my life as well." The farewell was quiet, filled with the weight of shared experience rather than grand gestures. Ethan mounted his horse, giving one last look at the homestead and the woman who had saved him. Ayana watched him ride away, the desert wind stirring around her, carrying a mix of sadness and hope. She knew that life would continue, with its daily challenges and moments of solitude, but she also knew that she had made a lasting impact on someone's life, and that someone had left an enduring mark on hers. In the weeks following his departure, Ayanna reflected on the journey they had shared. She considered the lessons of the desert, the value of kindness, and the importance of courage and integrity. She realized that helping Ethan had been a transformative experience, not only saving a life, but also reaffirming her own strength and resilience. The desert, which had once felt isolating and unforgiving, now seemed a place where connection, trust, and shared humanity could thrive. Ayanna also thought about the ripple effects of their encounter. Ethan had left her gifts, yes, but he had also left a deeper understanding of the power of compassion and generosity. She realized that even small acts of kindness could inspire change, create bonds, and strengthen the spirit. Her own courage in choosing to help a stranger had led to growth, trust, and a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that life in the desert was never easy, but it was rich with opportunities for connection, learning, and personal growth. Months passed, and life settled into its familiar rhythms. Ayanna tended to her goats, her garden, and the homestead with steady hands and a calm mind. Yet there was a new layer to her routine. The quiet confidence that came from knowing she had faced danger, helped someone in need, and made a meaningful difference. The memories of Ethan's presence lingered, bringing warmth to her thoughts and a reminder that even in a life of solitude, human connection could flourish. One day, a letter arrived, carried by a writer who had traveled from a distant town. It was from Ethan. He wrote about his travels, the challenges he faced, and the lessons he continued to apply in his life. He spoke of the gratitude he felt, the respect he held for Ayanna, and the ways in which her guidance had shaped him. Reading the letter, Ayanna felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that their bond had endured, not through constant presence, but through the impact they had on each other's lives. Ayanna carefully placed the letter in a safe spot, reflecting on the journey from the day she first found Ethan wounded in the desert. The memory of his weakness, fear, and reliance on her care reminded her of how far both of them had come. She had nurtured, guided, and protected, while he had grown, learned, and contributed meaningfully to her life. Together they had faced danger, uncertainty, and the harsh realities of the desert, emerging stronger and wiser. Life in the desert continued, with its challenges and quiet beauty. Ayanna moved with confidence, drawing strength from her experiences and the knowledge that she had acted with courage and integrity. She understood that life was a mixture of risk and reward, solitude and connection, challenge and growth. Helping Ethan had been a choice born of compassion, yet it had become an opportunity for learning, reflection, and lasting human connection. In the final moments of this chapter of their lives, Ayanna looked out over the desert from the porch of her homestead. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sand and hills. She thought of Ethan, out there somewhere, carrying the lessons of the desert and the memory of her guidance. She smiled quietly, knowing that both of them had been forever changed by their encounter. One act of courage, one choice to help, had rippled outward, shaping lives in ways neither could have imagined. And in that quiet desert, with the wind brushing over the sand and the sky painted in shades of gold and pink, Ayanna felt a deep sense of peace. She had saved a life, inspired growth, and forged a bond that transcended distance and time. The world was vast and unpredictable, yet within her homestead, she had found connection, understanding, and the enduring power of compassion. She knew that life would continue, with its trials and its joys, but she also knew that even the smallest acts of kindness could leave an indelible mark on the hearts of others.